Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to our program this evening on the Empire Station Complex Plan. We have a lot of good speakers tonight, which includes Senator Brad Hoylman, Assemblyman Dick Gottfried. We have Robert Atterbury, who's the Deputy Director for Jerry Nadler, District Director. Jeffrey LeFrancois, the first Vice Chair for MCB4. We have Holly Leicht, which is from the Executive Vice President of Real Estate Development and Planning at the Empire State Development Planning. And we have Layla, please forgive me if I don't say your last name correctly, Law-Gisiko. She's chair of CB5, Land Use, Housing, and Zoning Committee. Okay. Lowell, you can take it off now.
All right, I'm Lowell Kern. I'm here tonight in my capacity as a member of the Executive Committee of the Chelsea Reform Democratic Club, and I'm going to moderate this evening. Let me just give a little background so everyone knows, we're all starting with the same basis of information. About a year and a half ago almost, ESD, Empire State Development Corporation, put together a community advisory council to discuss the preliminary plans for the redevelopment of the Penn Station area. In January of this past year, former Governor Cuomo announced a number of plans for the development, putting billions of dollars into the west side of Manhattan. Among that was the redevelopment of the Penn Station area, at which point the community advisory council was expanded to include a lot more stakeholders in the neighborhood. The community advisory council met for a number of months, sometimes on a weekly basis, going over every conceivable, well, maybe not every conceivable, but most conceivable options for what could take place here with Penn Station and the neighboring area. The working group, the non-ESD members of the working group presented a report with recommendations to Empire State Development. While Empire State Development was working on that, we had a change in executive leadership at the Executive Mansion in Albany, and Governor Hochul took over, at which point she sat down with ESD, I assume, and her people, and reviewed both the original plan and the recommendations from the working group, took all of that together, and ESD presented to the working group. Who's ever not on mute, if you could please put yourself on mute. ESD presented to the Community Advisory Council working group a couple of weeks maybe last week or 2 weeks ago, and Governor Hochul announced the revised plan for what is now the Pennsylvania Station area. It's no longer called Empire Station. And the idea for tonight was to get that information out there to the public, to all of you, in a very basic way. So again, we're all dealing with the same set of information. This is not intended to be a debate of the merits of the plan up and down and cover every possibility. As I said, the working group did that for months. We've only got a couple hours tonight. We're not going to be able to cover everything. It's more important that we get the information out there. ESD will be holding a public information session on December 8th, Wednesday, December 8th from 5 to 8 on Zoom, which will be the place for all public comments and responses to the draft environmental impact statement and the proposal for the plan. That's where everyone can get on the record and say their 2 cents about what they think about this plan. That's the official, information about where you can put your official feedback. I've still got someone who's not on mute and causing feedback here, speaking of feedback. That's the official place to give your feedback to ESD about the plan. That's not what tonight is. What we're doing tonight is we're trying to get information out there. So to that end, Holly Leicht from Empire State Development is going to do a presentation that will show what the basics of the plan are, where it stands now after the input from the Community Advisory Council Working Group. Senator Hoylman, Assemblymember Gottfried, And Mr. Atterbury will be providing.
You got to click onto it directly.
David, please. Senator Hoylman, Assemblymember Gottfried, and Mr. Atterbury will be providing the viewpoints of our elected representatives and what their input to the plan and where they think this should go. We have Jeffrey and Layla from the community boards to provide some insight into the process, how we got to where we are, and what those positions are. At that point, we're going to open this up for questions. I'm going to start with questions from the panel. So if they have questions for each other about their comments, and then we'll open this up to the extent time allows for everyone to, put in their couple of, their 2 minutes or so of what they have to say. Again, we're not trying to solve everything tonight. We can't do it. It's taken months to get to this point, and like I said, in a couple hours, and I'm eating up some of that time now, we're not going to solve everything. But this is more about getting information out there so everyone on this call can hear where we've been and how we got to where we are and where we are right now. We'll work on where we're going in the future. The Advisory Council Working Group will continue to meet. There will be another group to deal with other aspects of the plan, the public spaces, which I think Holly will probably touch on. Senator Hoylman has been focused in particular on community needs, especially for the services for people in the neighborhood, and I'm sure he'll touch on that. And we'll go from there. But for now, I'm going to turn this over to Holly to start her presentation. She's accompanied tonight by Angel Santana from ESD, and I think, Angel, you're going to share your screen, right? All right, Holly, the floor is yours. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Lowell, and thanks for inviting me to come join this auspicious group. I'm also joined by Gabriella Green, who is the Vice President at ESD as well. And those involved in the community group know, she came over originally from HCR to help us out during that process and is now full-time with us. So I will get started when Angel can put up the slide.
Yeah, I just need to get host privileges so I can share screen.
Okay, I'm going to switch it over to you, and then afterwards you'd switch it back because there's only one host. So let me just give you 1 second.
While we're waiting, I will just quickly just clarify. So the recommendations from the group that Lowell referred to were kind of divided into a number of buckets, but some of them were really focused on the Penn reconstruction and Penn expansion projects, the railroad projects, and then some were more focused on the general project plan that ESD is leading. Our response is only to those recommendations that were in the scope of the general project plan. Those that covered the Penn block and the expansion are in the railroad's hands, and will be addressed as part of their environmental review process for those projects. But just to clarify, that is why you will only be seeing things that relate directly to our general project plan. Okay, first slide. Okay, so a few kind of hopefully statements that we can all agree on that kicked off this project originally. First, that the Penn Station reconstruction and expansion at this point really isn't something we can put off any longer. The station was originally built to accommodate about 300,000 commuters. In 2019, it was double that. And even with COVID, the projections of the railroads are that by 2038, it will accommodate 800 or need to accommodate 890,000 commuters. So it is the nightmare that we all experience is in part because it's wildly over capacity. Next. And as part of that, New York State government was charged with figuring out how to pay for a pretty tremendous set of projects. The Hudson Tunnels that everyone is aware of, sometimes known as Gateway, although Gateway encompasses more than just the tunnels, but the tunnels that have to be new tunnels under the Hudson, and the sandy damaged existing tunnels cannot be repaired until those new ones are completed. And then the expansion of Penn to add at least 9 new tracks, and then the reconstruction and integration of existing Penn. So that total is somewhere in the neighborhood, and these are still rough numbers, of $30 to $40 billion, of which, if the Gateway Agreement that was established among New Jersey, New York, and the federal government holds for all 3 of those projects, it definitely holds for the Hudson Tunnel project, New York would be responsible for 25% of that, or about 7.5 to 10 billion, depending on where that lands. So clearly that is a huge nut to solve for. Next. And then the third piece that sort of went into looking at this was thinking long-term about the future sustainable growth of New York. And obviously the recent East Midtown rezoning kind of recognizes the importance of trying to congregate growth around transit and transportation hubs. The Penn Station area has sort of missed out on that for many years. And so the idea would be that this is the right place for us to grow, just as we are growing around Grand Central, and other cities have taken the lead on this as well. Next. So these were the goals based on those premises that ESD was charged with, to develop a comprehensive redevelopment plan that would generate revenue to help fund the reconstruction and expansion of Penn and other improvements, to support the reconstruction and expansion through an integrated network of transit and public realm improvements. And these include improvements to the 4 subway stations that are proximate and connected to Penn to help support getting people in and out of Penn more efficiently, catalyzing transit-oriented mixed-use development, and then finally fostering long-term economic growth with jobs, modern office space, and new mixed-income housing. Next. So this is just a quickie background on Empire State Development and what a general project plan is, because I know most people in the city are used to ULURP, and that's the city process. The way that ESD does its projects are through general project plans. These often actually supplant local zoning, although they are done in coordination with the local municipalities when that's done. It lays out the goals, programs, the replacement zoning, essentially density and massing, and if there are financial terms, those of a project. They're accompanied by design guidelines that are enforceable design and planning controls, and it has to undergo secret environmental review, which in this case is a full environmental impact statement. And these are just some examples of projects, past and current, that have gone through our process and used the general project plan. Most recently, Moynihan Train Hall and the Javits Center expansion. On 125th Street, we're working on the National Urban League headquarters and Victoria Theater projects through that. And Belmont, the new arena and project out in Belmont is another example. And of course, Times Square and Roosevelt Island, slightly older examples, and World Trade. Okay, next. So this is the Penn project area. We identified 8 sites, 8 parcels that are proximate to Penn. The outline is the full project area, but we actually aren't doing any actions that impact the 2 blue blocks, which are the Penn and Madison Square Garden block, or Moynihan and Farley. Importantly, the 3 southern sites, sites 1 through 3, these are contingent. There is no condemnation or acquisition that is being approved in our plan. If, as I think most people know, the 3 railroads are studying the expansion of Penn Station. They're looking at multiple alternatives as a part of that process before they launch a federal environmental review. which is expected to get launched next year. So those three sites 1 through 3, would only go forward. We have the planning framework for them, but they would only go forward if those sites are selected for the expansion of Penn Station through the separate process that the railroads are leading. Otherwise, those would not be part of this redevelopment plan. Next. So Lowell referenced Governor Hochul's announcement. Time is fleeting. I guess it was 2 weeks ago. And her review of the original plan and working with ESB on and looking at the community group recommendations. And these were sort of her two major conclusions. One, that New Yorkers deserve a great Penn Station, and she is very focused on existing Penn Station, not just the expansion, because most New Yorkers who are on Long Island Railroad will end up only utilizing existing Penn. The expansion will primarily serve New Jersey Transit, and the community deserves a great neighborhood around Penn. And so this is the piece of the plan that she asked us to really focus on and revising the general project plan. Next. So we have had 18 community advisory meetings, some with the original CAC that Lowell mentioned, and then 13 of those were with the working group since April. So we met every week for 2 hours starting in the end of April. And we've also had 8 public meetings in town halls. This will be the 9th. Next. And as part of that and the recommendations we got from the working group, we put together, really responded to almost every recommendation that was in the plan that was within the scope of the GPP, with only a couple exceptions. We have reduced the density of the overall plan by 1.4 million square feet, which is almost equivalent to a super tall building unto itself. We are looking at, there was in the original scoping that it had originally been a commercial, only commercial buildings. And we heard from the community a desire for residential and affordable units. So there can be up to 1,800 residential units as part of what we studied in the EIS. And of those, 540 would be permanently affordable. And I'll get into a little more detail about that. There is about 8 acres of public space included, and as Lowell mentioned, a public realm task force will be launched with elected officials and other stakeholders, community boards, to really put together a plan for the public realm so that the public realm leads what we're doing as opposed to follows. If somebody could go and mute, I'm getting feedback if there's anyone not on. Increasing public transit access, as I mentioned, there's a whole network of public transit and pedestrian network improvements that I will detail a little bit. And then there are a lot of other improvements. I'm not going to talk about every single one tonight so that we have time for the panelists, but it includes space for community and innovative social services. Senator Hoylman has been very focused on trying to think about how we pilot some innovative social services here, and we look forward to working with him and other experts on thinking about how we can do that. Over 50,000 good paying construction jobs, as well as many, many permanent jobs, and greener transit-oriented commercial growth. We will require that all buildings here are built to be electric, so that they, when New York City and New York State green the grid, which the goal is to do that by 2040, all of the buildings can be carbon neutral at that point. Next slide. So reducing density, this was the original general project plan that was released in February. This is what the density was. And then next slide. And this is what it's changed to. So there were a couple things here. We've reduced the density by 7%, as I said, about 1.4 million gross square feet. We also had heard from the community group that there was a desire to have the density step down as you go westward and closer to the Penn South area. And so before we had the tallest building on 8th Avenue. Now we have shifted the bigger buildings over to 7th Avenue. And then also we are now requiring residential component. The building that you see to the far left, the little red one, would be 100% residential building, except for the base would be 1 FAR of community facility space, which we would RFP for a provider and at the time that we would RFP the site. So this would be a required 542 units, of which 162 would be permanently affordable. The amount of displacement that would be necessary if those 3 sites on the south would be acquired for the train station, even if every apartment was occupied by someone who needed an affordable unit, it's still fewer. I think it's around 100 and I should have that number in front of me, but I don't, but about 125, I think, residences that would be displaced if that went forward, and there'd be 162 permanently affordable units. So we would give a right to return for anyone who would income certify to those affordable units, and certainly the railroads, and we've talked a lot with Gene about this, his preferences for state laws that very much regulate how relocation works with anyone who would be displaced as part of that. But again, that is not in our process. We are not doing any acquisition as part of this. That would happen when the railroads move forward. Next slide. So in addition to requiring that building be residential, we added residential options for 3 other buildings. So Site 1B, which is right next to the original one that has to be residential, and then sites 4 and 8 also have an option to be mixed use and residential. So for a total, as I said, of up to 1,800 units across the site. Next slide. And so this is just a quick comparison of sort of how it fits into the Midtown cross-section. You have Hudson Yards to the left, and you have East Midtown, the proposed buildings there to the right. This is the original density. Next slide. And then you can see how it's come down, and it steps down to as you go west, so that we've created more of the density to the north and to the east. And then that's the commercial alternative. Next slide. And then this is the residential alternative. Next slide. So I mentioned about 8 acres of new public space. That includes what this is a 30,000 square foot new public plaza that would be on the 780 block just south of Penn Station. That's about the equivalent size of Rockefeller Plaza. And that would be where you can sort of see the NTA's draft design for the mid-block train station that would go between Madison Square Garden and 2 Penn. That would come out into this plaza area. Next slide. So we've increased the public space by making each site have a required ratio of public space in the revised plan. This is the original amount of public space that there would be site by site. Next slide. Then on the new plan, those percentages go up considerably, and those would be minimum requirements on each site. And then obviously that southern block has quite a bit more because of that mid-block plaza. We also we worked really closely with city DOT and city planning on a network of shared streets. And what shared streets are, there can still be some flow traffic for drop-offs and pickups and loading, but it's generally a more pedestrianized street with a very, very minimum, very minimum speed limit, no more than 5 miles an hour. So they get greened and have no curbs and are much more pedestrianized. So we had originally had 32nd Street between 6th and 7th, and 33rd Street all the way from 6th to 9th. We've added a recommendation to also have 31st Street between 7th and 8th as an additional shared street. Next slide. And just to give you a sense of what shared streets sort of look and feel like, this is 31st Street looking west now. Next slide. And this is sort of the concept. You would green it, you would have much more fluidity between street and sidewalks. We also, in all the plan, have extensively widened sidewalks to deal with some of the pedestrian congestion. And then as well, throughout the plan, I put this here, since shared streets are really meant to try to minimize vehicular traffic, there would be a 68% reduction in vehicular parking allowed in the district. Next. Here is the other example of 33rd Street, which really we see as becoming a major crosstown pedestrian thoroughfare. This is looking eastward now from Manhattan West. Next slide. And this would become a shared street for 3 full blocks. So, and also in addition to limiting vehicular parking, we also are increasing bike parking by 87%. We're doubling the required amount, but since so many of the buildings in the district were grandfathered because they're older buildings, we actually would end up having an 87% increase in bike parking, and that's in building bike parking. Next slide.
So what's just watch?
This is going further on the 33rd Street, the importance of 33rd Street. Layla particularly had brought up the importance of Empire State Building, both as just an iconic view, but also as a form of orientation when you're coming out of some of the train stations. So we have changed the design controls on one of the sites in order to have better views and more visibility of the Empire State Building along 33rd Street. So before, this was what this would look like if you were coming out of the subway in front of Moynihan on 8th Avenue. Next. We're taking out and requiring that there can be no building in that red zone. So the next slide shows what it would be like. And there you get the whole spire. So our sort of requirement for figuring out new design controls was having sky on both sides of the spire along 33rd Street. Next slide. Here's another example. This is from the mid-block exit or entry of Moynihan between 8th and 9th. This was the old design, taking out that chunk. And then next. There you go. And then you get the full spire. Next slide. Lots of transit and pedestrian improvements. I'm not going to go through all of them. There's 49 improvements. We worked really closely with MTA on the subway side, particularly in this. So this is sort of existing. The blue, the light blue is obviously Moynihan and the entries that are into Penn now, and then the 4 subway stations. And then next. So this is a lot of things. We are requiring new in-building either subway or Penn entries in every one of the new buildings. So this has 2 benefits. One, they're going to be much more visible, and there will be many more of the entries both into Penn. 8 will go into Penn and 10 will go into the subways. But they also will take subway entries off of the sidewalks. So further helping, in addition to the widening of the sidewalks, helping reduce congestion. There's also going to be actual improvements in the subway stations themselves. That's in the light blue, 8 new escalators, 2 new elevators, widened stairways, widened platforms, also some reconfiguration of fare zones. So a lot of improvements to reduce also congestion in the subways themselves. And then finally, the orange is a below-grade pedestrian concourse. We would be requiring this pedestrian concourse be built into the basement of all the new buildings there. There's 2 options. The east-west would either happen there, which would be an expanded Gimbels and modernized Gimbels passage, or on 32nd Street. The MTA is still studying those. But essentially, you would be able to go all the way from Herald Square Station into Penn without coming up to grade or having to cross 7th Avenue. And then you'd also be able to go all the way up to 34th Street. So this would further help relieve the congestion at the sidewalk level. Next slide. And then just to give a sense of kind of what these new highly visible entries would look like and how much they will help decentralize pinch points, because people will, it'll be more the model of Grand Central, where at Grand Central, part of why it's never feels as congested is because there's so many different places to go in and out. You're not just going into a single entry. So it will become more like that, and that will help relieve pinch points and congestion. So this is currently 34th and 7th. If you're looking here, you're looking southwest. The LIR entry there isn't even on the corner. You have to know it's there to find it. And then there's a subway entrance on the corner. Next slide. Within the new building, we would move the Penn Station entrance to the corner. It would be a double height. And so you really would have a significant, sorry, go back, a significant entry. Wow. Okay, go back. This is a different one. Go back. There you go. Okay. So you'd have a significant double height entry. This is a gateway point for Penn Station at 34th and 7th. So you now have multiple really visible entries. Next slide. And then this is another example where the Duane Reade is. You've got the subway there. This is called Site 5 in our plan. On this, you're at 8th. This is at 8th Avenue and 33rd. Next slide. So you'd have a new entrance into Penn Station there as well. So the idea is that while, yes, having, a train hall itself is important, you also want to be able to have multiple other significant entrances. Next slide. So sort of just to wrap this up, and again, there are a lot of other improvements, and I will give you the website for those. We did a lot to activate the streets front by limiting the size of commercial lobbies and the size of retail frontages and requiring active frontages, and a lot of other sort of detailed controls to ensure more activity on the streets. But I want to turn it over as quickly as possible. But the one other point I wanted to make on the financing is that all of the real estate revenues that would come to the state, so the structure is payments in lieu of taxes, pilot payments. The state does not pay taxes on land that it owns. So instead, taxes would be paid by the private, we would RFP the public sites, and some of them are already privately owned. Those sites would pay the equivalent of full taxes. The amount that currently goes to the city and the general fund in taxes would continue to go to the city, so we would not take away any of the current tax base. But the taxes that they would pay on the additional density that they would get, those would get sent to these projects and in their entirety. So there are some appropriations that have already been made for these projects. Those would go straight to the MTA. The development related revenues would flow through ESD, but we would send all current taxes that would be adjusted for inflation to the NYC general fund, just as they go today. And then the additional ones would go either to the MTA for the Penn projects and those subway improvements I talked about, or we would also create a public realm fund, which was a recommendation of the community working group, and some portion of the funds would go to that. So when that public realm task force creates its plan, we have some funds up front that can pay for the public realm improvement. So that is where all of the funds that would come through the real estate would go. Next slide. And then this, I just wanted to end on a timeline of where we are in the process. We'll mention that we kicked off in 2020 with the scoping. We released the original draft general project plan and draft EIS in February, and then we held up to do the working group process that we were requested to participate in We got the recommendations in August from that group and have been working on these revisions since then. Our public hearing, as Lowell mentioned, will be December 8th. That is on the original plan, but it's also on the revised plan, which is on our website. And then we would have at least a 30-day public comment period, and then go back and revise the plan based on public feedback again before going to our board for consideration sometime probably in the beginning of second quarter of next year. This is the website. I encourage everyone to please go there. There are more revisions to the plan and more details of the plan on our website. And I think that's it.
Thanks so much, Holly. Really appreciate that. I'm going to go first to Assemblymember Gottfried. Dick has been part of the working group and represents this area, as does Senator Hoylman. And Dick, maybe you can give us some background on how we got to where we are and your perspective on that.
Okay, well, I think Holly has done a pretty good job on giving us the background. If the Gateway project and the reconstruction of Penn Station are sort of the starting point, and the what is called the general project plan, which is the new development to the north and northeast of Penn Station, is creating new development to generate revenue that will pay for Gateway and the redevelopment of Penn Station. I think it's important that when this all began, the work on the existing Penn Station, which is what most of us use when we use this area, was going to be the last thing done. And happily, Governor Hochul decided that it should be flipped around, and so the refurbishing of the existing Penn Station will be the first part of the process, not the last. There has been an enormous amount of community input into all this. Holly talked about the community advisory group and its working group that includes representatives from community boards 4 and 5 and a lot of other community people, all the local elected officials, a lot of other interest groups. And there has been just an enormous amount of time devoted by Empire State Development, as well as the MTA and Amtrak, to working with the community on listening to, on hearing our concerns and answering our questions. And I think a lot of the changes that Holly talked about are basically in response to the agenda of changes that the community work group put together. The reduction in density, the increase in public space, the increase in community involvement in planning of that public space, the inclusion of residential and a substantial portion of it being permanently affordable residential is important. One thing I think that still needs to be dealt with, Empire State Development is talking about making sure that anyone who is relocated by any piece of this project will have an opportunity to move back into the project area, and with some provisions for affordability and rent regulation. But I think it's important to try to make sure that the new housing that people will be able to move into is there for them before they are required to move out of where they currently live. Otherwise, they're going to have to move out, find someplace new, and then move back if that's their choice, which would be very difficult for a lot of people. So those are I think the key things. I know Senator Hoylman has a lot he's going to tell us about social and community services to be included in this. I think going forward, it's going to be really important to make sure that the community continues its level of involvement and the talent that's been devoted to the community involvement as this goes forward. So those are my major thoughts about the project.
Thank you, Dick. Senator Hoylman, we keep teeing you up for the social and community input part.
Hi,
So
how are you?
why don't you go with it?
Good to see everyone. It's really great to be here, and thank you, Holly, for that presentation, and thank you to everyone who's been participating. Dick, of course, and Congressman Nadler, the borough president, Speaker Johnson's office, Senator Jackson as well, who has a piece of this. Senator Kruger is just adjacent to it, so she's got a lot to say about it too, and of course the borough president. So I just want to first start off by saying this is an enormous project, and Holly's done a great job in simplifying it. But make no bones about it, this is one of the major public infrastructure projects of our lifetimes. It's going to be, when all is said and done, more or less the size of commercial development that we see at Hudson Yards. So it's very important that we all stay engaged as Community Board 4 and 5. And most of this is in Community Board 5's territory. So it's really good to see them here tonight. And both boards have been working very closely together and making their opinions known. And I know that it's not just the elected officials who are listening to them, but also ESD. And you've seen a number of the changes that have gone through kind of the first rendition of the community advisory groups. I can never get the acronym correct. First set of recommendations. You know, also, we have to recognize that it is fairly unprecedented in terms of a GPP this size. And many would argue that it's worth it given what we're getting. But as Holly said, the state has authorized this through the state legislature, as well as earmarked funds for it, $1.3 billion in the last budget alone. So this has been kicking around for some time, but I'm really glad to see this meeting tonight. I know there are going to be other public presentations moving forward. I think that with this, with great projects comes great responsibility. And I think we all have a responsibility to the most vulnerable in the neighborhood. And we know that this neighborhood in particular is really in turmoil, given the crisis of opioids, mental illness, and addiction, and homelessness. Really, in some ways, a perfect storm, with the pandemic being the backdrop. And so I see it, along with my colleagues, as a chance for us to hopefully, in this conversation that Ollie has outlined, really pursue some cutting edge social services that I think could address some of these problems that we all see as New Yorkers on a daily basis in this neighborhood. So I'm going to be working with Holly and our colleagues to get the best organizations who are most experienced in dealing with these problems, to understand how the public realm that we're looking to fund through the commercial development can actually assist some of those individuals in our community who need the most help. That's, I think, a mission that we all should have top of mind, in addition to the public space and affordable housing which I think will go a long way toward addressing needs of our community. But the centerpiece, and this is why I'm very glad that Governor Hochul has reoriented this plan to focus on Penn Station and to focus on the needs of New Yorkers who use Penn Station. If we're going to fork over, 17, 18 million square feet to a private developer, we should get something out of it as the public, and particularly those who, like Gene and his cohorts on Block 780, who may be displaced. So I'm really focused on that. I know that we have a chance at not just re-envisioning Penn Station, but perhaps even recreating it in a way that is beyond what has even been discussed here or by the MTA in terms of opening skylights and new entrances. We have to be bold in our creativity and our demands as a community because you have elected officials who want to see this project be successful, and it'll only be successful if the public gets its due. So I know there are many concerns with everything from historic preservation to overriding local land use to moving small businesses and rent regulated tenants. All of these have to be part of the discussion as we move forward. But if we can pull this off and have a new Penn Station, I hope with the appropriate public goods that will come from this as described, I hope at the end of the day, we'll be able to say to our children and grandchildren that it was worth it.
Thanks so much, Senator Hoylman. Robert Atterbury from Congressman Nadler's office is up next. Robert, can you talk a little bit also, in addition to what you were going to say about the role of the railroads and how that differs from the GPP, so we can make that clear?
Sure. So, hi everyone, Robert Atterbury with Congressman Nadler's office. And what I usually like to start off talking about this when I talk about what's happening here is I like to remind folks that we're not actually talking about one project. This is not one unified project. What we're talking about is actually 4 separate projects, all moving forward on slightly different tracks for slightly different reasons and sort of legal process by which different projects get approved. So there is Gateway, and that's usually, when it comes to us, referring to the tunnels under the Hudson. Those are the tunnels that come into existing Penn Station. And those are underway, and we just thankfully were able to pass a huge amount of funding for them as part of the bipartisan infrastructure package that was just signed into law today. It's a huge win for our country, a huge advancement in our, and a huge investment in our transportation resources and our mass transit. The second piece is the project that is being spearheaded by the railroads on how to accommodate the additional capacity that will bring us, that those new tunnels will bring us, when both those tunnels and the existing tunnels, after they have been repaired, are both online at the same time. You got to remember that the plan for Gateway is essentially to build new tunnels, close the old tunnels, fix them, and then reopen both and make sure then have both open at the same time. So we'll have additional capacity for more trains under the Hudson after that's over. And so the question is what to do with that capacity. And that's being looked at as a Penn expansion, as folks have talked about, to blocks 780 and the blocks on either side of it. There are also, but that is still in a planning stage, and the railroads are still examining what they think is the best alternative. That has not been selected. The preferred alternative, it's going through the National Environmental Process Act or Review Act, and it's called NEPA, and it is, they haven't yet selected their preferred alternative. They haven't finished that analysis on what they think is best. So that will come next. But that's underground. And so that's how the railroads, when I'm sure Holly will mention later that, and mentioned earlier also, that the GPP for those blocks only comes into impact if the railroads do in fact move forward with an alternative that involves taking those blocks for those pieces of it. Then there is Penn reconstruction. And now that's what the governor recently just announced her new focus on, right? And that's the existing Penn Station. How do we renovate that and make it better? It's something that people have been working on literally since the day that the old Penn Station closed. And so that's the existing Penn, and that is the congressman has applauded the governor for really refocusing on the idea that, like, we actually can't just leave existing Penn as it is. It can't be at the end of this process. We really need to make sure that we are putting in a cohesive plan for a new Penn Station, and that's within the current sort of footprint, as soon as humanly possible, and that it I think is responsive to the community's call and sort of the elected officials' calls to say that that plan has to move forward alongside all these others, because it has to be part of a unified plan for the neighborhood. And then there is the GPP, and now that is the Empire Station's development here, and that's going to be the pieces that are all above ground, all around it. And that's should the Block 780 be needed for the railroads and for that project. It's the blocks across the street, blocks to the north, and that's what Holly just did the presentation on. So there are really 4 projects here, all in various stages. And so I think when we talk about this, like, our office and the congressman really likes to focus on the transportation pieces of it, because those are the pieces that are most vital for our communities and trying to make sure that we are advancing them. And I think one of the things I'd like to point to is that as part of the governor's announcement, and it didn't get a lot of press, but I think is hugely important, is that the governor has instructed the MTA to work with its sister railroads, and that's Amtrak and New Jersey Transit, who all have a say in what happens in Penn Station, to create, I think it's called a stakeholder advisory group, or a SAG. We have the CACWAG, we have the SAG, we have lots of acronyms. But that's going to be a new group in which we're going to bring stakeholders together from all the railroads and from the community and the local community here to really focus on drilling in on coming up with a good plan for renovating Penn Station. The renderings we saw from ESD and from the governor as part of this are the MTA's representation of what the MTA would like to see happen and what the governor would like to see happen. But those don't happen in a vacuum. They can't order that to happen. They need the buy-in of both Amtrak and New Jersey Transit, and frankly, we would argue the larger group of stakeholders here before they can advance that. And so we are really excited to see that piece of it advance, and that sort of group that we've previously not really been able to participate, those conversations we hadn't really been able to participate in, advance and move forward. And I don't want to take up too much time. I will say one of the things that the congressman has really been fighting for is we really want to make sure that there is a true train hall included as part of this plan. There have long been conversations around moving Madison Square Garden. We would argue, I think that 2 Penn is on the other side of this, other half of the block is as equal rights as to move and or to take part of or take the ground floors of to turn into a train hall. That there's a lot of room and flexibility and creativity that can happen on that if we're able to really look at it from a holistic perspective rather than the perspective of any one agency or railroad. And I think those are sort of it. I'm sure there'll be questions, and I'll try to do my best to chime in as we go.
Thanks so much, Robert. Most of this project is situated in Community Board 5's area, and Layla Law-Gisiko is the land use chair for CB5. Layla, you want to give us your perspective on this?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much for having me and having CB5 sit on this panel. It was, as most of you know, a very lengthy process, a very robust community engagement. I think that we learned a lot through these 13 meetings at the notorious CACWAG. I think that, we made a number of recommendations. They were, pretty clear and strong. And they included, a number of points that are very important to our community. One of them is that, we recommended that this plan does not make any recommendation for eminent domain. The other one was to consider moving MSG. The problem with MSG is that it sits literally like a lid on top of the current Penn Station, puncturing the columns that support MSG, actually puncture the tracks and the platforms of the train station, and are in the way of really a proper improvement of the station, enlargement of the platforms, for example. We had objections to the funding mechanism, which we believe will be a liability rather than being a source of revenue. We also objected to the fact that this proposal would not be referred to ULURP for proper city review and engagement. We believe that the municipalities have the responsibility of land use actions, and that this responsibility should not be subrogated to the state, and certainly not in this particular area. We were, very hopeful to hear from Governor Hochul. Her announcement got us also, rather enthused. But when we look closer, we realize that, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done for this project to be supported by Community Board 5. Eminent domain, although it is not an action of this GPP, is still a recommendation of this GPP. And this is a problem. Secondly, MSG relocation is not included in this plan, and this is also a problem. The reduction in density, although it is appreciated, it would mostly concern those blocks to the south of Penn, and the Vornado properties would see a very minimal reduction in density. The funding mechanism remains the same. Which now is, a little hard to understand, because we're also told that the appropriations have been made. So the need for this funding and this revenue may be less pressing. And given that we are very doubtful that, revenue would materialize, and if revenue were to materialize, it would not be before these towers would get built, which we're told would be in 2036 or 38. We just feel that, and as Robert explained, the timeline of these different projects, once again, this GPP is, any land use action around Penn Station is the action that should come last. What should come first, indeed, and we certainly agree with the rest of the group and the elected officials and the governor, is, a true improvement to Penn Station. And a true improvement to Penn Station would involve really taking a deep and hard look in through running. And the concept of through running, for those who are not familiar with this notion, would be to actually allow for trains to come from New Jersey, stop at Penn Station, and continue on to Long Island, rather than having two separate railroads that go back and forth and use Penn Station as a terminal. Every city in the world that is a major city with a robust transit system uses through running, and this is a huge lost opportunity. If we were to really consider through running, the likelihood that an expansion is needed could be reconsidered very seriously. And if an expansion is no longer needed, then there would be no need to acquire and condemn these blocks to the south through eminent domain. So once again, we need to look at the pieces as they matter the most. The most pressing issue is a proper, thorough, sustainable reconstruction of Penn Station. That includes the ability to allow Penn Station to continue to grow, not for the 20 next years, for the next 100 years. It is that much more pressing that, as Robert underscored, and we're just so pleased about that, the bipartisan infrastructure bill was signed into law. We're going to be eligible for a lot of federal funding. I think we need to work very closely with what is known as the Northeast Corridor Commission, which is a commission that was created by Congress 5 or 6 years ago, that issued a report that is called Connect 2035. And they are the ones who are, Secretary Buttigieg sits on it, the Secretary of Transportation of all the states that are along the corridor sit on it. They are the ones who are really thinking about planning, and we should think with them, and we should collaborate with the railroad, with the commission, to really create a sustainable plan. And right now we are talking about a land use proposal that really bears kind of no merits truly to what really needs to happen, and has been labeled by a number of people as a distraction. Once again, there's no rush. There's no rush in deciding if we need 10 towers. And, a number of members of our community have actually questioned whether we need 10 towers, given that, the commercial real estate in New York is currently struggling tremendously, and was actually struggling before the pandemic. So, we have all these questions. We really look forward to working with this new group, the SAG, I think, if I gather what Robert said, working with the railways to work on a true improved plan for Penn Station, and remain, skeptical about the current GPP.
Thanks, Layla. Jeffrey LeFrancois was the CB4 rep to the original part of the community working group. So he's been working on this issue for way too long, probably, Jeffrey. Why don't you give us your perspective on this?
Thanks, Lowell, and thanks, everybody. Hi, CRDC. It's been quite a while. It's good to see everybody, and it's really great to be on this panel. Just a couple of things from CB4's perspective, and then just generally. New York City is not perfect, and our planning process is very ugly. I think we can all agree that the community probably wasn't consulted when the original Penn Station was built, and it certainly wasn't consulted when it was torn down. And what I can tell you as somebody who has sat in so many meetings on this, both as the working group and as I've been leading them for the community board, there's been a lot of community discussion on this phase of Penn Station. And I will say flat out that Board 4 does not feel it is right or perfect, but we are part of a process for the first time in a century. And it's something we're trying to figure out how to make the best out of. One of the key components that we are concerned about, if I could say, Holly laid out the plan, which is very detailed, and as Robert made very clear, super complicated because of how many pieces and parts there are to it, many of which are overlapping. There's actually a lot of community benefits, but the timeline of them is rather troubling. Many of them would come at the end of when many of these proposed developments are to be realized, and we really think it should be the reverse. Why should the community have to wait for their benefits when it's the community that's going to have to deal with the development, the construction, and the positive changes that come with that too? But looking at it from the community perspective, digging in on our benefits and what the community is seeking first is something we'd like to see reconsidered. As was mentioned also, really putting Penn first, which thankfully Governor Hochul has done, but we need to clarify that. We need to understand what the MTA wants, what Amtrak and New Jersey Transit also wants. We want a really good train haul and station, and we can't let the railroads get away with something piecemeal or disconnected from an overall good plan. So we also are really very pleased that this SAG, yet another acronym group, has been created. I believe it's sort of a first for the railroads as well. There is going to be a number of Community Board 4 meetings on the topic over the next month or two, I believe, and we will continue to participate in all the public hearings as we have previously, and of course, looking forward to incorporating the feedback we hear from tonight, as well as in our meetings going forward. So great to be here and looking forward to more of the conversation.
Thank you, Jeffrey. As we've been talking about here, there's still not a consensus on how to go forward on this. We've been working on this for a while. We have the plan we have now, which is better than it was, but there's still a lot of community process to go. Holly, could you again refresh us on where we go for next steps from here, that this is not the end of the line, so to speak? and where we go next.
Sure. So December 8th, as I mentioned at our website, both the original general project plan from February, as well as the draft environmental impact statement and the proposed revisions are all online. And so on December 8th, we will have a 3-hour public hearing that we'll mention on Zoom, where we'll present both the revised plan, sort of, a summary similar to what I did tonight, but also our environmental review consultant, ACRF, will also talk more about the impacts and the impact study. So I think that's a significant component as well. After that, there will be a public comment period. So you can comment live on Zoom at that hearing, but then also there's an opportunity for 30-day comment period for written comments as well. And then at that point, there is a requirement under SECRA that every comment, every substantive comment, has to be responded to in writing. So that's quite a process that the team will then go back and undertake to take all of the comments, both from in writing and from the public hearing, and go back and consider those and also respond to them in writing. So, there will be there's more analysis that will occur as a result of that. Some that we already know we'll do based on some of the feedback we've already gotten. So it'll be a few months after that before we would ever go to the ESD board for consideration of the revised plan. And that will definitely entail potentially, further revisions even than what's on our website now.
Thanks, Holly. All right, so we're going to open this up for some questions for the panel. If we have any, I'm waiting to see hands go up. And again, we're not, as I said, we're not going to solve all of the problems and all of the answers, have answers to every question that's been raised tonight. The idea for tonight was to get the information out there. So if you have questions about the process and how we're going forward and are better suited for tonight, questions about why wasn't this done and why isn't that done are probably better suited for ESD's public forum, but I'm not going to cut anyone off. So I'm waiting for hands. Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, some of you know who I am, and obviously I'm not pleased with the governor's revisions to the proposal, but I also want to just focus on Penn Station as opposed to the many other things in the project. And I was pleased to hear what Robert Atterbury said, and I hope the door is open to improving this. But I just want to say, or even ask, does it bother anybody that we're talking about spending $7.5 billion for an underground Penn Station and declaring that it's world class? That's almost twice as much as the Oculus Path Station costs. And this thing we keep calling a train hall is 450 by 40 feet. So this just want to make sure everybody knows I don't consider this bold. If you want to look at a train hall, look at the picture behind me. And it's dangerous when people say these things haven't been decided yet, but the way we're proceeding sounds to me like we are. And as was just announced today, that Madison Square Garden's taking up a big lease at 2 Penn Plaza. Well, they were thinking of moving to Hudson Yards, and I think if you press hard, they've even had discussions about moving over there. So, this sort of, we haven't really decided, but the final hearing's in a month. And if you don't like what we're saying, you're really part of a different project. I got to tell you, it leaves me cold, and I really hope people are going to work as hard as they say they are, because this is still a very, very, very deeply flawed anti-urban proposal. And anybody who thinks we're making positive history with this as it is deeply mistaken. And I support virtually everything that Layla said.
Does somebody want to respond to that from the panel?
Yeah, I'll respond.
Go ahead, Brett.
Sam, I agree with you. We got to get more out of this project, and that's why forums like this are so important. I know that what Robert mentioned, I think, is sensible in today's news, that Madison Square Garden is actually taking space in 2 Penn Plaza, I think quite literally opens up the possibility that we could convert that ground floor or multiple floors of 2 Penn into a new train hall for Penn Station. I think that's got to be on the table, especially with that leasing news today. And as was mentioned, what hangs in the balance is the fact that MSG doesn't pay taxes, property taxes, and that they also have an agreement with the city council that is due to expire next year. So I think the community has leverage in pursuing what you described. And I think we should most certainly collectively organize on that pursuit of a real train hall for the busiest train station in the Western Hemisphere that has more passengers on a daily basis than all 3 regional airports combined. It would be a disgrace if we ended up with what has thus far been described in very scant renderings. So we have an opportunity. We just have to collectively organize and pursue it.
Thanks, Brad, and I won't be a smart aleck and sneak anything else in.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you, Brett. Does anyone else from the panel want to respond to that? Jeffrey, you've got your mouth open. You want to say something?
Shocker. Sorry, I think that just on the point of this project, the state can do it. And so, when we were first at the table, there was no affordable housing in the mix for these development sites. I know this isn't about Penn Station, but now it's in the mix. It wasn't at all before, and that came because of a very loud chorus from the community. We did a word cloud after the town hall from the summer, and the 2 most commonly used words were skyscraper, which I found confusing because it's Manhattan, and affordable housing. And so we've all doubled down on that in a real major way. And while we all want a brand new Penn, I certainly do as a regular user. Again, we have a process right now that we have to work through to get the best out of it. And that's sort of where we've been coming from in this process.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Take another question. I'm sorry.
I might actually chime in.
Go ahead.
And I will say, and I think we hear this point off and on a bunch, and I don't think it's how people intend it, but I think it has the same sort of impact, which is we can't improve Penn Station because it's too expensive. We can't make this improvement to Penn Station because it's too expensive. And while we absolutely want to be spending our dollars smartly, and we want to make sure that we are not wasting money and we are not overpaying for things and under delivering, the long and short of it is that any project here, and the busiest train station in the Northern Hemisphere, I think, or something like that, it's extraordinary, and at the heart of Manhattan, that has to be able to keep running while this happens. It's going to be extraordinarily expensive. It's going to be expensive. We know it's going to be expensive. I don't think we should necessarily be scared away from fighting for a good train hall because it's going to be expensive. It was too expensive to save the original Penn Station. It was too expensive to build a new one for the past 60 years. And so the answer is it's gonna cost money. It's gonna cost a lot of money. I'm not afraid of necessarily of an expensive project as long as it's a good project, as long as we are truly improving what it is that we are doing here, and we are improving the station and the area for all of New York, and frankly the New York region and the country. It's worth the cost. So Sam, and I don't think it was how you meant it, but this idea that somehow it's, the price tag comparison to the Oculus is too much. Of course, it's going to cost at least double. This carries like 150 times the amount of people or something absurd.
The point is that you're spending twice as much and
not getting as much
and keeping it in the basement. I think
yes.
if you moved Madison Square Garden and decided to build a train station, even the one I'm talking about, it's probably $3.5 to $4 billion. That's paying a premium a lousy train station, and people should not be calling that a world-class train station. No train station in the world that's underground is called world-class, except maybe
Sure.
the old City Hall station.
Which I have never actually had the pleasure of doing the loop
You
on the
should do
6th,
it. It's
and I've lived in New York for a long time. But so yes, I think like the price tag itself is not what scares me. It's the idea that we have to fight for a good station, and I think that we are opening new avenues to do that, because you know what the governor has shown, what the MTA has shown, are not final designs at all. They have no sign off from the other railroads. They are not set. There is room for us to continue to fight to try to make sure that they are good station. We get a good station out of this. And if your vision is that is not a skylight down the middle of the block, then I say join us, join the fight as we try to make sure that we are pushing for a bigger one.
I'm very relieved to hear that.
That was part of the reason I went back to Holly about talking about where we're going in this process and what's up next, because this isn't a final plan. And, you know, even ESD is aware this isn't a final plan, and there's a lot of moving parts here. And that's part of why, you know, we have to keep working at this, and getting information out there is so important. Holly, did you want to add something?
Yeah, well, I was just going to ask you if you want me to talk for a second about the railroad project. I mean, I don't have all the details on that, but we did in our plan add a second option for the expansion block for something that would be on 7th Avenue, as well as the mid-block option, because that was something we had heard so much about, the importance of the frontage on 7th Avenue. We expect, you know, I think it was mentioned that the railroads are doing an alternatives analysis, looking at a northern option, the southern option, and a through running option to see what alternatives are viable. And that process is underway, you know, starting well, they've already started it, but I think in 2022. So I think the idea is that these projects will line up as they figure out their alternatives analysis and how that impacts ours. And I just, if I could, Lowell, just one point on why, and I do get intuitively people saying, why are we talking about the buildings that would get built when we still don't have the plan? I do understand that. But from a funding perspective, getting the plan approved really is significant for a couple reasons. One, it shows, you know, we did get the $1.3 billion appropriation Brad mentioned, but obviously there's still a long way to go. And I think realistically to ask the state to appropriate for all of this is not realistic. We feel confident. We've been working with Ernst & Young and other financial experts from the outset of this. There's still an active market for financing against the real estate here. We do not think it's a fool's errand to anticipate that there would be funding for this. There is a need for modern office space still in Midtown. And there will be for generations. This isn't a 5-year plan. This isn't even a 10-year plan. So getting that going now is important for financing against it. So the more real the development starts being, the more you can finance, which means, you know, borrow against those future incomes. You don't have to have all 8 sites built out before you can finance against them and get some of those revenues to be able to start doing it. But you need a plan that is approved before the market would consider it not risky. So it does, I totally understand the concerns about the market right now, as well as sort of a question of why would this come first, but it is a long-term process, and financing against it does mean we need an approved plan sooner rather than later.
All right, we've talked a little bit about the $1.3 billion that the state has authorized, but Brad or Dick, if you could jump in here. There are limitations on what that money can be used for, aren't there? Both reaching for their mute button.
Well,
Yeah,
I would
basically.
Well, let Dick, why don't you go first, and then Brad, you can follow up.
Yeah, the
You beat me to the mute.
$1.3 billion basically can be used only for transportation purposes that are below grade. And we put that language in there to make sure that it couldn't be used for planning development or for executing development because we have this process in place.
All right, Brad, did you want to add something to that, or?
Well, I will say that it is very hard to audit the use of this kind of funds and compare it to statutory language. But which is why I voted against this portion of the bill. But that said, I really do appreciate that language, and we're going to have to stay on top of it as legislators and as people who, the public who wants to ensure that this money is used appropriately. And we'll probably end up having to reappropriate it, Dick, next year because it probably won't be spent. So hopefully under the new Hochul administration, we can add even additional belts and suspenders to ensure that it's used in the appropriate way.
All right, thank you both for that. I'm going to take another question now. Mike Noble.
Yeah, thanks, Lowell. Hey, look, I just want to embellish on what Brad and Sam had to say. MSG has always been the fly in the ointment here. And we've got to take a position and get them out of there if we're going to have a train station that's on the ground level. I mean, I see no sense in ever, making just extending the station the way it is now. We've got to put it at ground level. And that's about it. And we at CB4 and others really have to keep on this and try to get MSG out of there. That's my comment.
All right, thanks, Mike.
Can I
I'm
add a
sorry.
piece to that?
Sure, Robert.
This is my own personal hobby horse that I have ridden for a year now, is that the tracks under Penn, that make up Penn Station, right? The tracks extend from 7th Avenue all the way over into Moynihan. Madison Square Garden is certainly on top of a key piece of the center, but there's another whole half of that block that has direct access to all of the tracks. And that is currently the site of where 2 Penn is, and all of those entrances. And we know that about 70% of users who go through Penn Station head east when they leave the station. And so yes, Madison Square Garden should move, but I don't want us to only limit our imagination to one side of the block when there are 2 that are possible.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you.
Lowell, if I could ask a very quick comment on this plan, on this point. The big issue with the reason why MSG or 2 Penn needs to move is that the columns are basically planted onto the platforms. Each platform is its mini death trap. I use Penn Station every day. I commute to New Jersey. To exit the platform takes way too long. And there are just way too many things, columns, structures that are not movable, that prevent from the platforms from being enlarged, prevent any elevators or escalators or stairs to be installed. And that is really the core of the issue. This train station is not safe. The state legislature actually passed a legislation in 2018 calling Penn Station, it's the Penn Station Safety Act, calling every possible effort to be put into making those platforms safe. So, I want everybody to keep that in mind. This really should be our top priority.
There's one thing to add here, though, about Penn Station, and that land is privately owned. So about Madison Square Garden, I mean, that land is privately owned. The garden owns the land they're sitting on. So they would have to either be forced out one way or another in order to get this. Jeffrey, I know this is one of your, to use Robert's phrase, hobby horses.
And I didn't say it first tonight, for the record. I want everybody on the line to know I didn't bring up MSG first. Layla and Holly laughing the most because of how much time we've spent on the topic. Yeah, I think it's extremely complicated. The nature of MSG owning the land and them on top of the tracks. And then when I was learning about MSG and how the building is old and there's issues with it too, that we see above ground when we walk there. So I think it's really important, to Robert's point, to think about east and west. And while Penn Station is, MSG is on the west end, and how we think of that as being the sole inhibitor. The two Penn proposition is interesting and significant given the ownership. I know there's been that the owner's name has been tossed around a lot in the chat this evening. So we have to think about, it does come down to politics here as well. It's New York real estate. And I think understanding the players, what the trade-offs might be for a significantly better station, if at the end of the day, they're worth engaging, I think it's stuff we should consider.
One quick point, the underground and the land actually belongs to Amtrak. So there's a little sliver of hope that, like technically those columns are actually, they support MSG. MSG owns from, the ground up. Anything that is below belongs to Amtrak, which is a, federal corporation. So technically those columns, are just, getting a right of way as a privilege from Amtrak. So Amtrak plays a major role in this whole story.
Okay, so just to be clear, I want to just make sure that everyone knows what we're talking about here with 2 Penn. 2 Penn is a Vornado building, and Vornado is, I don't want to say partner, but they are the prominent builder of a lot of the proposed towers because they own a lot of the land around Penn Station as well. So when Robert wants to throw 2 Penn into the mix, he's talking about the same developer there. Fran, you got a question?
I certainly do. I have a really, I think, a really important comment. If Penn Station is to be redone for this century, the end of this century, and the next century, I cannot imagine it happening without this through running. I can't imagine. I mean, it's just like you're talking about building something or rebuilding something which is antiquated, which is, which is old-fashioned, which is a gas-powered car as compared to an electric car. I don't know how you can not make that a center point of this redevelopment.
Robert, I'm going to come to you as the train expert here. Can you talk about how, just not the pros and cons of through running, but just how it was addressed by the working group?
Sure. So everybody knows through running is the concept, right? I think Sam mentioned earlier, trains would go through like a subway station instead of a terminal, right? They go like through like a subway station instead of Grand Central, where a train pulls in, stops, and turns around and goes out. So we have pressed the railroads very hard on this point. The community put a lot of questions to them about it. We brought in Sam's group and Rethink to help make a presentation, help educate the group, and then to use those points to try to help push the railroads on this. The next step for the capacity project, right? Remember, there are 4 projects: the tunnels, the capacity project, the renovation, and then the GPP, which is the zoning piece above ground. And so the capacity piece of it is going through NEPA. The next stage of that is for the railroads to release an alternatives analysis. And this is when they look about sort of all reasonable alternatives as they see them. And we have really pushed, and through running is one of the alternatives that they are studying. And they have to keep an open mind and really study them across the board. And I know I can hear Sam in my ear saying that of course they won't, because they already have theirs picked. But the next stage of it is that after they release their draft alternatives analysis, that we all get to review it and comment on it. So we will have an opportunity to really call out if we think that they did not do a fair and reasonable alternatives analysis. We have seen that happen before, actually over at the Port Authority bus terminal, which many of you remember a couple of years ago was a big blowout fight with the Port Authority, where they released alternatives analysis and they had a preferred alternative, and we completely reversed it. We completely got them to revise it. Felicia in the chat saying, and the air train, which just got canceled. So like it is possible, particularly at that stage where you can the community can really weigh in when if we think things have not been given their due consideration. Whether or not how through running is possible, the impacts on the larger system, how it all goes, are all wildly technical questions that are far outside of my capability. But so we do have to look to our railroads and the experts on them as part of them to study them. And then we get to, as advocates, and elected officials and community members on the outside weigh in about it. And so that's sort of the next stage, is that we're waiting for that alternative analysis to release. I will say, given the focus on it, if the railroads don't do a good job at really studying all the alternatives, I would be very surprised, because they know that we are watching them like a hawk on this topic.
Can I join this?
All right, Holly, Frank, give me 1 second. Frank, give me 1 second. Holly, all of this analysis, that's what the stakeholders advisory group is going to be looking at?
Right. The MTA will, well, the MT, I mean, Robert's right. It will be, there is a stakeholder group that MTA is creating. How that works on expansion, I think they still have to figure out. They are definitely starting it to think about reconstruction. But I think, you know, the governor's directive is that MTA has to do an inclusive process as well. Certainly, as Robert said, through running is now one of the alternatives they're looking at for the NEPA analysis. But just, and maybe this goes without saying, maybe everyone already knows this, but while there is the debate about whether through running could occur at existing Penn, the intent certainly is to make sure that any expansion would be built so that through running could happen at the expansion. And so that is, I think everybody's on the same page about ensuring that there would be through running from the expansion.
So Holly, I'm sorry I put you on the spot there, because I know you are not the railroads and they're not with us tonight, but and that's really their issue, because we were focused on the GPP tonight, but invariably, as Robert indicated, it's 4 projects that kind of get lumped together. But my understanding was that that's part of what the stakeholders advisory group will be working on.
Well, I think we're waiting. Robert has held the MTA feet to the fire at our last CACWAG meeting. So I think they had promised that they would come with the scope of their proposed group. I think, Robert, was it within a week or 2 weeks? So we should know more.
Before Thanksgiving.
Before Thanksgiving, so.
Before Thanksgiving, and you better believe I have next Tuesday marked on my calendar. The one thing I do wanted to say is that when I said that the SAG won't necessarily look at it, is that the alternatives analysis is a formal part of NEPA that happens sort of like the public hearings alongside any engagement process. So the SAG certainly can have conversations about it and engage in it, but the concept of taking draft an alternative analysis, presenting it to the public, and then receiving comments on it, that is set. That will have to happen regardless.
That's part of NEPA.
Yeah.
All right. Let's change gears. Gene.
I just want to definitely thank Assemblymember Gottfried, Senator Hoylman. Certainly, I want to thank Robert. This is really good news that we're hearing tonight. Very good news about the station. Has the possibility to actually be an above ground station. The possibility that plans could be to move Madison Square Garden or even to Penn to build a station that we could all be proud of. I thank you for Layla for supporting these plans that need to be much better for the community. I'm the only at-risk resident that's part of the working group, and people know my opinions on all this. And it's good to see finally that some people are agreeing that New York deserves a better plan. And we all, if we're going to spend this much money, need a better plan. You also have to all be aware that the southern expansion of Block 780, while being a separate part, is the preferred alternative by a large majority. The most planning has gone into that. It is intrinsically linked. 4 of the buildings, of these massive buildings, will be on the southern expansion part. So if southern alternative doesn't go through, they lose 4 major buildings and the pilots from those 4 buildings. So don't disregard the fact that they are intrinsically linked. We'll see what happens. But the idea that Senator Hoylman and Gottfried understand that language has to be written in to protect displaced, rent stabilized senior families if this happens, is very greatly appreciated. And Robert greatly appreciated that we're looking at a real above ground station as a possibility. Thank you all.
Does anyone on the panel want to respond to Gene? Or I think he was just giving you all kudos for doing your, already. If you want to take a bow, go ahead. Roberta, go ahead.
I like to think I know what's going on.
I just wanted to say, I'm glad.
Roberta.
Oh, I just wanted to say I'm glad we had Dick Gottfried to lead the drafting of this language.
Go
I just
ahead.
wanted to say that I thought I really knew what was going on. And I really thought this project was about rebuilding Penn Station. I had no idea that we are including evicting tenants. Now, if we were talking about evicting tenants in Penn South, you would have had this overwhelming roar. But that block, I just called a friend of mine who lives on that block. I asked him if he knew anything about this, and he knew nothing about this. I knew nothing about the eviction piece of this. And as somebody who's been involved with tenants for 30 years in Chelsea, I am appalled that this is the first time I'm hearing about this. And what outreach was done? Because he didn't know anything about it. He will know about December 8th. And Dick, you know what happened when we relocated people on West 17th Street. You're destroying a culture. You can't just move people the way you relocate cars because you've got the block closed off. And this is a big thing to people who live there, to people who are elderly, people who are disabled, and to just breeze over it is really outrageous.
All right, well, Roberta, that's part of the reason for tonight's forum. We wanted to make sure the information got out there to as many people as possible before December 8th, because as I said at the outset, nothing we do here tonight is official. Tonight's informational. December 8th is when it's the time to raise all those concerns, and that's why we
Don't
did.
you think there should have been papers up on that block letting people know about this meeting? I knew about it because I'm in the club. I'm on Facebook. But if I hadn't been on Facebook or in the club, I wouldn't have known about this. My friend Ron didn't know about it. He's got 3 weeks to put together a comment. He's got 3 weeks to organize his block. We've got 3 weeks to get in touch with every tenant organization in this city.
Lowell,
And
if I could just share something a moment. I believe there was, I'm not sure where your friend lives, Roberta, if he's on the north or south side of the block or which block they're on in particular, but I do know that there was a direct mailing made to all residential tenants in the area that may end up within the GPP. So look, it's been a hard year and a half for everybody. So it really could
Was
depend
Met
north or
Council
south side, but
invited?
there was definitely
Was Met
mailings that went out
Council?
about it too.
All right.
Was Met Council invited? Was it Chelsea from,
First of all, I want to go to Holly. Holly, first of all, can you talk about the mailing that Jeffrey was talking about? Were you involved? Was ESD part of that?
No. This was.
No, I think this is when we did the residence town hall a couple months
Okay.
ago that you guys sponsored. That a mailing went out to everyone for a residence town hall that Roberta, where we gave a lot of information. As has been mentioned, we are not doing acquisition and condemnation as part of this. There's a whole multi-year process ahead to decide if any of that's going to happen. But we did do an overview, and I think the mailings went out to everybody for that.
All right. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, Holly, the deadlines. There's the December 8th hearing, but there's the public comment period extends beyond that, doesn't it?
Yes, it'll go at least 30 days after that. We haven't finished setting that, but it'll be at least 30 days after that.
Okay. Now, with regard to the mailing, Robert, you get your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to add a piece on this, and I heard it as part of Roberta, and I just wanted to make sure, because this is one of those very confusing pieces about the multiple projects and sort of the way in which they are intertwined and interconnect. So what's coming up is the hearing on the GPP, which was what would happen if those blocks are taken in as part of the capacity project for the expansion. The actual decision whether or not that is necessary is not in 3 weeks. It's not being made immediately. That is again going to be done as part of the NEPA process, where the next step is the release of the alternatives analysis. And so then there are more steps after that, including public hearings, review. They have to select a preferred alternative, then there has to be an EIS. There's a bunch more stages beyond that. So that decision is possibly years away. It is not being decided in the next month, 3 months, 6 months.
All right. Further to that, I heard another voice chiming in there when I asked Holly that question. Christine Berthet is the chair of the Transportation Planning Committee of CB4. Christine, remind me what happened with the mailing, please.
What happened is that we took all the names and address of all the people living and working in all the zip codes and buildings which were which were potentially going to be evicted. And Assemblyman Gottfried's office helped us send a mailing to each of those people. Plus, there were a number of individuals that went and flyered the street. So we kind of did as much as we could with the information we had.
All right, and Wendy Pastor, who's Assemblymember Gottfried's chief of staff, just posted in the chat some more information about that. All right, so Roberta, did you want to follow up on that, or did we answer your questions for now?
You
for
just
now,
answered my question.
I said for now.
You know,
Okay.
I don't think they did such a great job on Moynihan. It's a very slippery place. If you've ever been in there, we're lucky people haven't been sued more than they have. So I'm just wondering what the heck they're going to give us now.
All right, thanks for your comments, Roberta. Olive, you're up next.
Yes, do you hear me all right? I guess I haven't been paying too much attention to it, but I looked today, and what got me is density. This is an area of the city that is terribly dense. And what you're talking about, I can't remember what the numbers were, but you're bringing in many, many more people into this area. It doesn't seem to me the right way to be going. And then, of course, when you take a look at this, there's streets and there's horrible shadows. Is this what we want the city to look like? Is that what we want people to be exposed to? Is this really the future of what we think New York should be? And then I can think years back when we were talking about this, bringing the more trains or Gateway, building that, the big trains into Penn Station. Wasn't there once talk about putting one of the subways into New Jersey so that people could get into the subway system there? And that would be a great relief to those of us who live here in Manhattan.
Jeffrey, you want to talk about the subway to New Jersey?
Sure. As a big proponent of sending the 7 to Secaucus, that was certainly once a thing. It would require another tunnel. It would also be extending the New York City transit system into New Jersey. So I'm sure there'd be some major jurisdictional questions we'd have to hash out, but not a foreign concept on the West Side, one with a lot of obstacles that really hasn't gone many places. I know there's a lot of discussions going on around improvements to Port Authority to sort of offset some of that. But certainly this is gonna happen before that, I think.
Well,
Okay.
what can I say to this, except that you're building tunnels, and maybe one of those tunnels could be for a subway that went in to take the New Jersey people in through here into our subway system, and that relieve us from this terrible density problem that we have in Midtown.
Layla, do you want to talk a little bit about the density from CB5's perspective?
Yes, sure. You know, this is one of the areas of concern that we raised in the report that we issued. You know, I think that when you look at the open space that is being contemplated here, you know, we hear 8 acres of open space. It sounds very generous. the way you look at open space is actually when you bring it back to the number of people who are going to be using this open space. You know, you need to put it in the perspective of the number of humans, bodies that are going to be walking there. And currently, under the plan that we have seen and the numbers that we have been given, there's going to be a tremendous reduction of the amount of open space per people who are going to use this area. The number is basically a 10 multiplier. We're going to increase by tenfold the number of people who are going to be walking in this area. And that includes both, the passengers of these trains, because we're increasing the train capacity, but it also includes the users of these office space that are going to be coming to the district. So you can see that, the renderings look very generous and beautiful with a lot of greenery, but there's a lot of conflicting uses. So, this is a real question. This is a real question. When you start, putting all the users, including the cars, the bicycles, the pedestrians, the trucks for MSG, because, this plan does not contemplate moving MSG. So the trucks are going to be somewhere. A number of trucks actually cannot be accessing underground loading area of MSG because they're simply too big. So, these shared streets are going to be shared by many. And, these uses are going to be conflicting possibly. And it's a real concern. I know that Christine has spent an enormous amount of time looking at this issue. The public realm is something that is going to be really critical. We are hopeful to see that, there's a plan for the public realm that will precede the construction of these buildings. This is something that is very important. Now, is it as robust as it should be? CB5 believes that it is not, and we're going to continue to push for more.
Well, I just wanted to add to that. What good is the open space if it's always in the shadow?
Community Board 5 also agrees with this statement.
All right, thank you, Al. There's a question in the chat, and I've heard this answer a number of times, but I'm not the one who can give the best answer, so I'll leave it to the panel. Someone asked, how will the people who are being evicted be compensated if they are in fact evicted because of the southern expansion? And I've heard this answer a number of times, but I'm going to screw up the answer, so I'm going to ask someone else on the panel to answer. Holly, you got it?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. So again, since this process is in the future and it's not clear what agency would even be doing the acquisition, but probably one of the railroads, not Empire State Development, probably either Amtrak or the MTA. The process is typically starts that if the entity can come to a negotiated sale with an owner, they would do that first, but usually that doesn't materialize for all the properties. So then they would do eminent domain, in which case ultimately a court helps determine the value. So you start with appraisals of what fair market value is, but courts ultimately are the ones that help figure out exactly what that compensation would be, which often is higher than the appraised value just based on appraisals.
All right, thanks, Holly. We've got under 10 minutes left. I've got two more hands up. Anne, go ahead.
Hi. So I have been a tenant in that neighborhood on and off for the last 40 years. And when you were talking about the density, I just think about trying to get down that block, and 32nd Street I'm talking about, and it's next to impossible. So in any case, that's a very good point that was made. But the point I want to make is about the Hotel Penn. I know that in the original plan, I don't know if it's in the current plan, but they had talked about building 2 new hotels. And in the meantime, they were planning on tearing down 2 hotels. And currently the Hotel Penn is under demolition internally. And it's a historic structure. It's where music was integrated for the first time. Benny Goodman and his orchestra played there in the Café Rouge. And it's probably the only place in New York City that has a famous song. Pennsylvania 65000 is the phone number for the Hotel Penn. But we're just destroying the city. We're just erasing it. We're erasing our heritage. We're erasing our history. And I'll just end on this little story. My father was born and raised in the Village and Chelsea. And when I was a little girl, he walked me through Penn Station and he said, I used to sell newspapers here. And I said to myself, where? Now this was 1970. Where would a kid sell newspapers in this place? And it wasn't until I became an adult and saw the old Penn Station that I said, oh, this is where my father sold newspapers back in the 30s and the 40s. And I just think that what we're allowing to happen here to the culture and the beauty of New York City is just a crime. And the view, if all these buildings get built, the view of the Empire State Building is going to be totally blocked. And the Empire State Building, ask any tourist, the Empire State Building is the #1 thing that most people, when they think of New York, they think Empire State Building and Statue of Liberty. And I can say this because I'm actually a licensed New York City tour guide. And I totally oppose this plan. I totally oppose the eviction of the people who were living there and the destruction of the beautiful buildings. And I think we should go with the through running and just redoing Penn Station. And that's it. That's what I have to say. I can't hear you.
Oh, well, you're on mute.
Yeah, everyone does it once in a while. As Holly indicated in the original plan, the part of what the working group asked for was to make sure the views of the Empire State Building were preserved as you exit the station. So that was part of the presentation. Holly, is there something about the Hotel Pennsylvania building that you can address from the GPP?
I mean, the only direct thing is that, Landmarks has been asked to consider Hotel Penn multiple times and has declined to, mostly because so much of the historic fabric is replaced. But I mean, I know that won't answer what Ann is talking about, but that is the main reason, and
it's because Landmarks is controlled by the real estate industry.
And that's beyond the scope of what we're discussing tonight.
They had their permit to demo it preceding this, when they had their special permit to build the same building that they are going to build or planning to build from city planning that expired 10 years ago. So it's sort of been through that process in the past. The only other thing I would add is to Ann's point about 2 hotels. Only one site now could have a hotel alternative. The other site that had a hotel alternative is the one that's now going to be required to be residential.
All right, Luana, last question for the panel.
Thank you, Lowell. Hi, everyone. So I really just have a comment. Let me put my hand down. I think I don't want to repeat what Layla already has said, because I thought she said it so eloquently and her comments were right on point as far as I'm concerned. One of the things that concerns me is our legislators. They're not concerned about the people that they're displacing. I don't know what it would be like for somebody to tell me that I had to move from my apartment because they wanted to put up some building or some edifice that reaches to the sky. I don't know what that would be like, and I would hate to have that happen to me. The other thing is, we're talking about buildings, we're talking about money, we're talking about infrastructure, but we're not talking about the people that's affected by all this. I think, like Ann had said, something's happening in New York City that's very scary. One of the reasons Governor Cuomo had initially started this project is because he walked around the Penn Station area, and saw all these homeless people and all these people hanging out, and he thought it was a really disgusting area. That's what he said. And then Governor Hochul came along and she said the same thing in other words. So one of the things that is not mentioned here is the social issue. One of the reasons why there are so many people mentally ill on the street is because they were replaced by residential towers. One of the reasons why there's so many homeless is because the affordable homeless, the affordable apartment situation is a lie. Apartments are affordable only for those with the median income in that area to afford them for whatever their household size is. So that's a joke. So every time somebody says affordable housing, I get agita because it's really not true. So for 162 units to be created, affordable for how many people, and to have these towers raised up to God knows how high, still, if you look at the renderings, the affordable housing was this low, the residential housing, yet the towers were this high. And one thing Holly said was that there was a lack of commercial space, if I'm not misquoting her. As I walk through New York City, I see so much open commercial space that is vacant. So I don't understand why we need more commercial buildings. I just don't get it. So I just think, and another thing, I'm sorry, I don't have that great eloquence, but one of the things that we're discussing also in this area in Penn South is the congestion pricing. And so how is this going to affect us with congestion, as Ann already had mentioned? This is just going to congest the area even more. So I don't understand how this plan is going to work for this neighborhood. It just isn't going to work, period.
All right, Luana,
Thank you.
a couple of the things you said there are beyond the scope of tonight's panel. Congestion pricing, I'll put a plug.
Yes, I know. I just mentioned it.
Here, wait a minute. For CRDC is running a congestion pricing forum. Mindy, it's Thursday night?
Yes, Thursday night.
So we're doing another panel Thursday night. You're all invited to discuss congestion pricing, which is one of the things Luana mentioned. The affordable housing issue is an ongoing issue citywide. It's the primary focus of a lot of what CB4 does. Again, with the exception of identifying that one building on block 1, which is in CB4, I think a discussion of whether or not affordable housing works is beyond the scope of tonight's program. But if there were things in there that Luana said that anyone wants to respond to, I'll throw the door open. Otherwise, we're at 8:59, and I was told we had to cut this off at 9 o'clock.
Well, I would just say, Luana's right about the need to help the most vulnerable in this neighborhood. And that's what I hope we can tee up with some experts. It's an enormous opportunity for us to address this problem that is chronic and really only getting worse. So I could not agree more.
I no question about that. I'm just trying to keep us focused on one plan at a time. Does anyone else from the panel want to add anything before we sign off?
I just want to thank everybody for chiming in. It's a vital part of the process, and I think you're going to influence the outcome.
All right, that sounds like a good place to end. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to my colleagues at CRDC for putting this together. Thank you mostly to our panelists. Holly Leicht from Empire State Development, State Senator Brad Hoylman, Assembly Member Richard Gottfried. Where are you, Robert? Robert Atterbury, Deputy District Director for Congressman Jerry Nadler, CB4's Jeffrey LeFrancois, and CB5's Layla Law-Gisiko. Thank you all for coming. I hope this has been informative. December 8th is the next public opportunity to address this plan. And I know Holly wants you all to be there.
Great job, Lowell. Thank you for hosting this.
Joe, you want to wrap us up?
Oh, sure. No, great job, Lowell. Thanks to everyone. As you said, terrific questions from the 70 or so people who have been on. Really good points. As Lowell brought up, on Thursday, we have a forum on congestion pricing. So obviously very important as well. So please join us on Thursday. Again, thank you, Lowell, and everyone on the panel. Terrific job, terrific conversation. Very helpful.
Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a
Thank
good
you,
night.
everyone.